Is it better to combine length and girth training or to do them separately on a day to day, biweekly, or monthly basis? Example is length on 1 week and girth the next. This is for penis enlargement for those who are uninitiated.
You guys take it away.
All right, let's start with Perv.
Um, well, I think there are a few ways that this answer could go as far as I'm concerned. How you want to periodize your training is probably going to be primarily determined by what your primary goal is. Do you want mostly length or do you want mostly girth? Um, we do know that there is a sort of accommodation that happens in most soft tissues when you're straining them repeatedly at about 8 to 10 weeks, and then after that, you sort of need to decon or at least lighten the total volume overall to a place where the body can sort of reset and recover. And that's one of the reasons that I think Beatty and I have talked more. And the more and more we go on, the more I think we're figuring out that rest is just a crazy integral part of this that not necessarily a lot of the old school guys got wrong, but they just didn't necessarily consider.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of those guys were sort of the more is better. So, if I was to break it down, I would have to say you may want to periodize it in terms of just like you would training. And of course, I'm a meathead, so I'm going to think about this like a power lifter. In powerlifting or in strength training, we have what we call macro cycles, which are a period of months or potentially even a year. So that's your year-long plan or your 3-month plan. You have a mesocycle, which a mesocycle could be anything from 3 to 4 weeks, and then you have microcycles. Microcycles are what goes on in 1 week's time. So you could potentially approach it like you're saying. I think you could potentially approach it on an alternate day, one length and one girth. However, going back to me and being a meathead, you're not going to get 100% of the length results that you would if you focused on length, and you're not going to get 100% of the girth results that you would get focusing on girth. It's sort of like recomping. Like if you bulk, you're going to get bigger. If you cut, you're going to get smaller. If you recomp, you can do both, but it's going to take twice as long to do, BD's making a face.
I'm trying to interpret what you're saying. So, in my opinion, you're mostly right. I just think I have a different way of thinking about it. Since we have such a small amount of time that we can generate work without overworking, if we are mixing, say, 20 sets of expansion work with pumping and then an hour or two of length work, we're going to just be chronically overworked and we're never going to actually see positive tissue adaptations. So that's why I predominantly separate my stuff in 6 months blocks.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree.
Any comments, Hank?
So, I mean, Perf mentioned those like old school heads, and in some ways, I think these guys like know nothing, and in other ways, I like kind of agree with them. And so, my take on it is like I think you should do both at the same time, but you have to understand that my girth work is basically pumping, and I think that pumping is a good actually healthy exercise by forcing that healthy oxygenated blood into the penis. And so I do agree with if you have a focus one way or another, you need to focus on it. But I think that, in my experience, I made both length and girth gains at the same time. Now I've only tried one method, which has basically been stretching and pumping synchronously. But I when people ask me what do I recommend, I typically tell them to do both at the same time, because especially for length work, for girth work, for example, even if people aren't going for girth work, I typically tell them to do some sort of manual stretch, because I think it's for lack of a better word, kind of priming the tunica for expansion. And so by putting that additional stress on the tunica, it can make it more prone to expand for girth. So yeah, I typically recommend doing both, but that's just my take on it.
All right, another caveat. Both Perv and I pump before length work. So really
Yeah.
what we're arguing is that you need to prioritize one thing. All the exercises are going to benefit you for positive tissue adaptation. It's just elongation is going to get you longer. Pumping and clamping are going to get you thicker faster. So pick and choose what you want, but you're going to need a little bit of each for optimization.
Yeah. And to sort of reiterate or go back and talk about what Hank was saying, I'm not saying I necessarily I'm not ever going to say that what the old heads in the PE community didn't work, because clearly it did. Clearly, they made gains, they got results. All I'm saying is, we always want to stay current with the data. We always want to stay current with our practices and principles, and we want to base it on evidence. But as a community, we're gathering tons and tons of anecdotal evidence, that I think large amounts of anecdotal evidence are just as valuable, if not more valuable, than some studies that's going to take 5 years to get published, if it ever does get published and
Right.
funded. And so,
Yep.
to BD's point, I have never done girth work, because I started. Yeah, well, I started at a midsection. That's what I'm saying. I started at a midsection right girth of, I think, 5.7 to 5.9 is sort of my guesstimate. In the beginning, I didn't know. I didn't think I didn't think PE was actually going to work. So I really didn't bother to track my initial first, half of an inch of girth gain or half an inch of length. But to that end, same as Hank was saying, I've made, 3/4 of an inch to an inch of girth gains, not ever trying, not ever doing anything for it.
All right, I'm
So
going to say one caveat. Perv is a super responder, in my opinion. So, like, he is the most flexible man I probably know. And I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but between that and all the other stories he told me, I have not met a person that has responded as strong as him.
yeah. Well, to be fair, I think I knew a lot about soft tissue coming into this,
That
and
helps.
so I think I think I'm a good example of somebody who came into this and practiced what I think is the most intelligent approach to PE from the beginning. And if I learned anything from powerlifting, it's that you don't fuck around and switch from program to program to program. You stick with one thing, and you see where that gets you. And so I see a lot of guys that jump from interval extending to static extending to, like, hanging for 9 hours a day to using an ADS, and then they're at the end of the year they're like, I haven't gained anything. It's like, well, no shit, you didn't fucking stick with one thing for long enough to see if it actually even works.
Yeah, basically
Yeah.
you can tweak the accessories, but you can't tweak the meat and potatoes of the routine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You were going to say something, Hank?
No, I agree with that completely. I have so many guys that or even just their programs are like, okay, first I hang, then I clamp, and then I extend, and then I do manuals, and then blah 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 blah, and like that is their like routine in a day, and I'm like, dude, whoa, you got to cut 90% of that out. But
There's like 9 different things.
Yeah, like
I get those DMs all the time, and they're like, what do you think about your routine? And I'm like, I think that it's a wonder you have a penis left. Like,
Exactly, right? Like, I've been trying to untrain so many of my clients with this like old way of thinking, and that's what I love about my strain protocols and fatigue protocols, is that it just shows you what you need to do, and it takes all the guesswork out of it. I know it's still kind of experimental, but just based off of that, I can just tell you when someone's overworking based off of those metrics. So
yeah, absolutely.
all right, I think we beat that question to death. So let's move on to